One hard conversation can save you so much future pain, and yet there's one big conversation we're absolutely all of us avoiding. New Zealand is on the brink of its biggest ever transfer of wealth, and most families are walking into it with zero planning and a whole lot of unspoken tension. We're in the early stages of a $1 trillion inheritance wave. Baby boomers are now well into their 70s. This isn't a future problem, it's already begun. But most families don't know how to talk about it, and it's creating big issues. Look, welcome to Ask the Experts, where each week we talk to people in the industry, get the inside word on what's happening right now, what that means for the tactics that you should use to make the most of your money. And when I talk to people in the financial industry, they'll tell you most families are still avoiding the inheritance conversation out of politeness, fear, or just not knowing where to start. And look, the money side is important, but the stakes are actually higher than that. Families are falling out over this, whether the dollars involved are big or small. Kids can burn through unexpected windfalls. Adult siblings can be pitted against each other in ways that could have been prevented with just one honest talk. So look, we've started out on a bit of a scary footing, but we're going to make it so much better with a solid action plan, thanks to the lovely lady joining me now, Katie Wesney from Enable Me.
Making Sense has partnered up with Enable Me to get you the strategies for reaching financial freedom faster. Whether you're wanting to get mortgage-free or grow your wealth through investments, they've got the team to help you. Head to their website to learn more. Visit enable.me today.
All right, Katie. Love having you back in. Do you know, every time you come on, I get little comments saying, it's Katie, we love her. I feel like I never get it's Frances, we love her.
We do love you, you know that.
Thanks. I really led you into that one, but I'll take it anyway. Look, let's start with the big picture. $1 trillion, wealth transfer, that's fairly big. What's happening there?
Yeah, hugest intergenerational wealth transfer New Zealand has ever seen. As you said, baby boomers are turning 70, 80, and they have ridden some property booms. As we know, they've built businesses, they've grown wealth that like lots of us can't even imagine. And that $1 trillion is going to be passing hands in the next 20 years. And if you're not sure how much 1 trillion is, I had to look it up myself. It's 1 million millions. And lots of Kiwis are treating this like the weather. It's something that happens to you, not something you should prepare for.
Yes. Oh my God, that's such a good way of putting it. I mean, here's the thing that I think as well can be an issue. We talk about this $1 trillion wealth transfer, right? Huge amount of money, but that's made out of big amounts, small amounts, everywhere in between. Does it still cause problems, whether it's big or small?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen more of a to-do over 300,000 than multi-million-dollar estates. It all comes down to lack of preparation, and that lack of preparation just creates chaos.
Yeah. Why are we so bad at talking about this stuff, do you think?
I think it's that classic Kiwi mix of wanting to seem greedy or promising or dangling carrots that might not eventuate. So I think that adult kids don't want to ask because want to, be seeming like vultures, or, parents, there's uncertainty, so they don't want to bring it up either, just in terms of kind of actual numbers, because there's questions around timing, etc. And we think that magically this is all going to work out. There's some kind of weird optimism going on, and I think it comes down to the fact that Kiwis don't like talking about death. And they certainly don't like talking about money. So it's like this weird combo of the two of them together. So likely we might need a few drinks to kind of bring it up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because I feel like I've been on both sides of this, particularly with my mum. Me and my mum are pretty tight. And I have this very, I can literally picture in my head where this happened. So I know I was probably about 9 or 10. So I had the concept of people die and leave wills. I didn't have the concept of not being a weirdo about it. But totally honestly. And I went through a little bit of a phase of like looking at my mum's earrings and stuff. Great earrings collection, my mum. And being like, hey, when you die, can I have that?
My kids have said the same thing to me, and you're like,
My mum had to ask me to stop. I did it so much. She had to be like, hey, so thank you for liking my earrings. Can you stop asking for things when I die? It's coming across like you're waiting for it.
Yeah, little Francis Cook, little inventory of future assets. Love it.
And I remember being like, oh yeah, good point. Hadn't really thought, like, man, 10-year-olds are oblivious. Fast forward to now, and I've actually got a little doc set aside that me and my mum went through together, and we talked about like any hard lines of, if anything's getting donated to charity, she does want it going to this charity, she doesn't want it going to this one, little things like that. We actually went through that because I now no longer try and get my mitts on her earrings all the time. We're in a much better place. I'll still take those earrings.
Not so fun fact. When you take on a 30-year mortgage, you'll probably pay more than double what you originally borrowed because of the cost of interest. That's probably not the Kiwi dream you bought into. The team at Enable Me specialise in taking charge of your money and growing your wealth, including how to get rid of your mortgage faster. Book a consultation with an Enable Me financial advisor today by visiting enable.me.
It is quite a difficult conversation to have, right? To be able to lay out the money side of things, to acknowledge that death is coming. Do you think part of it is just it's a little bit scary to acknowledge, even as you get older, that death is coming?
I think so. But in the not saying, there are so many assumptions that happen, and those assumptions are just not healthy. I think parents assume that kids understand the intention behind something that they have no knowledge of. I think kids assume that they'll get nothing or that it'll be split evenly. I think often I've had clients tell me, well, mum and dad have said that we're getting the house, but they haven't clued them in on the fact that there is a large mortgage on said house. And sometimes, farms are promised to one sibling, unbeknownst to the other siblings. And it just creates this atmosphere that everyone's kind of existing in parallel universes of assumptions that just don't align. So dangerous.
Okay, so difficult conversation for so many reasons, but an important one because you don't want to have the situation where you die and cause a family feud. So how do you start this conversation? Is there a good way to sort of get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I think you start with values, not valuables. What do we want to achieve as a family? I think that's super important, and that's where you anchor yourself. And in terms of the conversation, I always encourage people, and if you take one thing from this conversation, is that please, can you make sure you have a will? Over half of New Zealanders do not have a will, and it just really scares me. And people should really arm themselves. If they do think that they might get an inheritance, they should arm themselves with how to manage money. I think that's so important. Don't wait for the windfall to figure it all out, because I think that's when generational wealth becomes generational regret.
100%. This is something that I've talked about in other episodes where we've talked about, teaching your kids about money. I think one of the big things you can do is actually teach yourself about money and then have those conversations about what you're doing quite openly as much as you can, right? I know people feel funny talking about money, but if you can have those real world examples of, oh, this has happened and we're doing this, you don't have to get into the nitty gritty right away. But to have those conversations in some form and to flex that muscle of this is something we talk about, I think you'll just by having those conversations more regularly start to get some of that discomfort going, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also telling the stories of previous generations. So my grandfather inherited the entire estate, and that absolutely destroyed the family because they felt so excluded emotionally and financially. So it's how do we prevent that from happening in future generations?
Let's get into that, because you mentioned that a little bit more before as well about, people assume it's going to go equally, and it doesn't always. I mean, I think part of it is, you look at something like a farm, that might not be possible to give evenly if you're wanting to keep the farm intact. And there are all sorts of situations like that where it's not necessarily possible for things to be equal, or other times it is possible, but for whatever reason, it's not going to be. I mean, family politics, they're complicated things. So how do you deal with that side of things? And is there a way to ease that conversation where it might not be equal, fair?
You've just got to be open and honest, because if you're not, and people find out after you're gone, that's when the destruction happens in wealth. And also family-wise, siblings don't talk. And that certainly happened in my family, which is just, terrible for my dad.
Heartbreaking.
It's so hard. And I think having those conversations, because if you don't, if people receive more or less, I think it doesn't even come down to dollar amount. It's almost, Francis, how much did they love me? Were you the most responsible child? Did you go and see mum more? Did you get the call when dad fell over? And if you don't have these conversations, it's that inheritance that becomes the final report card for family relationships. And what a shame.
And I feel like as well, sometimes people might have questions that whether or not it's a hard conversation, still having that closure can really help. And if you rob people, it's a hard word to use, and it's maybe a stronger word than I want to use, but it's somewhat cowardly to not have the conversation and give them the chance for closure, because it could be better overall, right?
Agreed. And I think, being really upfront, understanding the intention, it just eases the conversation, and you actually protect the wealth, because again, it doesn't mean that things are going to go swimmingly just because you avoid the conversation. And, when people are fighting, that's when assets get sold before they should. Legal fees really eat into estates. And that's not what people want for their hard-earned money. They want to help future generations. And I think being brave and honest, you can never go wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So if someone's listening to this and thinking, oh, yeah, that sounds pretty bad, we should probably have a talk. I mean, we talked a little bit about first steps, but what do you do? Do you call a family meeting?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. It starts with one conversation. And again, you start with what do we want to achieve as a family, and you take it from there. Simple.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie Wesney from Enable Me. Now, look, I know that was a bit of a hairy topic, but if you want to know more about it, do let us know. We can always dive deeper into some of these aspects. But before you go, hit subscribe wherever you're listening to Making Sense, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever. And if this episode helped you, send it on to a friend. Maybe save them from some of these hairy conversations happening in an even worse way. Until next time, have a great day.
Just a note before you go, this podcast can only give you general information about how things work in most cases. It's not individual financial advice. We're all different, so some of this might not apply to your specific situation. Take what works for you, ignore the rest. If you're after individual financial advice, a financial advisor is always the best bet.